are already part of the Camp K12 family. And it's just nice to be able to see you face to face. This only happens once or twice a month, and so I always love to join. A quick intro for parents and kids that are here in what we are doing today. Some of you are already taking courses with Camp K12. Some of you are guests and are not. Would love to just spend 2 minutes telling you a bit about what our mission is at Camp K12. Also, can tell you a bit about our background as a company, how we started, my background as a company. But we're all here today to meet our main guest, whom I will introduce a little later. Let's quickly get started by talking about what we do here at Camp K12. So Camp K12 is, think of it as a new type of school. The way your kids have school, they used to go to school and they used to take classes, they take the backpack. Camp K12 is a new type of school focusing on skills that are essential for the world we live in today. And technology skills, parents, as you know, are something we cannot do without, no matter which industry we're in. Whether we are in the design industry, fashion industry, in agriculture, in healthcare, I'm sure parents, regardless of which industry you're in, you have already seen the role that technology plays in your life, in your work life, in your company's trajectory, in enabling us to build products that make other people's lives better. That's what technology allows us to do. And if you think about the biggest companies in the world today, they're all tech companies. You have companies like Google, Microsoft, Twitter, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. These are all companies that are either built by coders or they run on code. And one of the things we like to do in our online school, which we call Camp K12, is not just teach in a theoretical way. In fact, we don't teach in a theoretical way. We do everything project-based. And one thing we've always done at Camp K12 since our early days, by the way, we started in 2010. Some of you may not know the story of Camp K12. We started in 2010, teaching coding to kids at a time when nobody else was thinking about coding. And since 2010, we've built curricula for AI, for 3D VR, for app development, for machine learning, for every type of, every subtopic under coding, but always in a hands-on way. And so you, at least those of you who are already doing classes are already accustomed to that. There's a second ritual or tradition we've been doing since a very early time in Camp K12's story, which is that ever since 2011, we have been doing field trips to company offices across India. So we did our first field trip to the Google office in Bangalore in 2011, in 2012. We kept the Google field trip going throughout our years, working with students from various cities, and we would invite people to come with us into these offices. We did the same thing with Microsoft, we did the same thing with Adobe, we did the same thing with IIM Bangalore, IIT Delhi, always bringing in guests or taking you to guests that were engineers, product managers, visionaries in different companies, because it was a chance to share with our students and our family at Camp K12 that coding is not just it's not a theoretical exercise you do in your room. It is a way of thinking that allows you to solve real problems that can change a billion lives, which is what a lot of these companies do every day. Now, during a time like this, during COVID, it's hard to do that. It's hard to take you to a company office and have you meet engineers in the company headquarters. So we thought, why not flip things on its head, and why not flip it around and invite some of the brightest engineers from across the globe to come meet you online, and thus was born the idea of Camp K12 Talks. Today, we are here for episode 2 of Camp K12 Talks. Last month, we did episode 1, the inaugural episode of Camp K12 Talks, where we invited an AI engineer from Facebook Silicon Valley, one of my classmates from Harvard University. And today we have one of the classmates of one of our earliest team members, Rishabh, whom I will soon introduce, from IIT Bombay, who has invited one of his dear friends, Deepak, who is a machine learning engineer at Twitter, also in the Silicon Valley in San Francisco. And we do this because we want to give your kids a chance to understand what coding really enables you to do as a practitioner. Because we do not think that coding is something that you do just to do well on your marks and your exams. Sure, coding helps you with academics, helps you with your mathematical thinking, and it will help you in your marks, but it does so much more. It can enable you to build products and solve problems that can not only help you get jobs in the best companies in the world, but most importantly, and what we really care about, is to help you start your own companies and solve your own problems, because we think you should be building the next Twitter. You should be building the next Facebook. You should be building the next Microsoft and Google. If you think about the stories of these companies, Microsoft was built by Bill Gates, who was a middle school student when he started coding. And Microsoft wasn't even his first company. He had been building companies since childhood. He built his first company in high school, then went on to build Microsoft. Mark Zuckerberg had been building new websites every day in school, went on to build his first company in high school, and then went on to build Facebook under a different name initially at Harvard University. So that's the spirit that we want to bring into these sessions. So we will be doing these monthly. And next month, again, we will have another session where we invite a guest from Microsoft. And the month after that, we have a great speaker lined up, and we have various guests coming. Then every month we'll be doing these sessions for you, for our community. During a time like this, even if we cannot transport you into these headquarters, into these companies, we can bring those companies to you and bring the people at those companies to talk about what they do day to day, to talk about life in the companies, to talk about what coding can do for your child. So that is the purpose of this. I'd tell you a little bit about my own background. I come from the Silicon Valley as well. And I actually grew up and did my later part of my schooling in Silicon Valley, early part of my schooling in India, and went to MIT, studied computer science there with a bunch of friends that I hope to introduce you to over time, who are now working at these companies or running these companies in the Valley. So we will be bringing all of these people to you, and we would love feedback from you if you have special recommendations on which companies you want guests from, whether it's Tesla or it's whatever company that you want to meet a guest from. We should create a wish list, and we should allow you to share your ideas. I can see some smiling faces as kids have some ideas for where they want to meet guests from. So we will make that happen. All right, so that's enough from my side. We are here at the end of the day to learn about our guest. And so Rishabh, why don't I hand it over to you? Rishabh is one of the earliest team members of the Camp K12 family, an IIT Bombay graduate who is part of our CEO's office, where he works closely across every function of the Camp K12 organization to build a bigger and better school of the future. So Rishabh, over to you to introduce our main guest and to carry forward the rest of the event.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anshul. Thanks for the helpful intro. Hi, everyone. So my name is Rishabh. As Anshul mentioned, I'm part of the CEO's office here at Camp K12. And when we thought of doing something like Camp K12 Talks, all of us, started looking in our personal networks to see, hey, who do we know, who are our friends, who we know who work at these, these sort of big tech companies who our kids and the parents would be super excited to interact with. And from my network, the first name that I thought of was Deepak. So I just immediately reached out to him, and he was gracious enough to agree to be a part of this. So let me just give a quick introduction about Deepak, or DDK as we used to call him back in college. I'm still confused what I should be calling, but yeah. So then I'll hand it over to you, and yeah, you can take it ahead from there. So yeah, just in terms of introduction, I think Deepak comes from Chennai. He's done his schooling in Chennai and then did his undergraduate in mechanical engineering from IIT Bombay. If I'm correct, he was top of the class, or at least in like the top 1-2 back in Bombay, a silver medalist. And then he did his master's in machine learning from Carnegie Mellon University, post which he works at Twitter as a machine learning engineer for close to 3 years, if I'm correct. He works at the headquarters, which is in Silicon Valley. Deepak, before sort of we move over to you, I think let's just clear my confusion. Should I be calling you Deepak? Should I call you DDK? What do you prefer? What do you go by right now?
Well, I have to say, I did like the DDK nickname in college, but I feel like it didn't really stick after I left IIT. But it does bring back fond memories. So whichever works for you.
Okay, awesome. I'll stick to DDK then. Okay, so so we've this is the second episode. The first episode we did was with Nikhila Ravi. She's AI engineer from Facebook. We did that last month. The major focus of that event was on what is AI and what sort of changes it's bringing about in the world. What's life at life of a Facebook engineer like. We thought why don't we sort of, flip things a little bit this time, and we look at your journey, right? And we sort of double click in certain areas which, which kids would really want to know more about, like, how did you sort of, obviously the journey is Chennai to Silicon Valley, right? So that's the whole journey. But, sort of if we slice that up into pieces, how do you move from, how do you get into IITB, right? What was that journey like? How hard or maybe easy for you, for people like you, like, and, and then post that, we can move on to the other, other stages. But yeah, why don't we just start out with Road to IIT being our starting point, right? When was it that you actually decided you wanted to get into an IIT, or and did you have IIT Bombay always planned? And what was that journey like? If you mind, walking us through that.
Yeah, sure. So for me personally, I was always sort of interested in like physics and math and that whatever little computer science we had in school. So I think just sort of at the back of the mind, there was always this assumption that I'm going to go into engineering. I think we started like me and my parents, we sort of seriously started considering IIT as an option towards the end of 10th standard mostly. And that's when we, up to that point, I'd already been focusing on school. After that, we decided to like actually put me into like a coaching program for IIT. I think like JEE prep is pretty common, I guess, for a lot of people. The one that I decided to go to, so you're right, I was born and brought up in Chennai, but I lived in Bangalore from 5th to 12th grade. So I did my JEE coaching actually in Bangalore. And it was part of like this dual teaching program where they sort of teach you both like the IIT subjects as well as prepare you for like your state board essentially. So it's sort of one integrated program, because there is like this option of you going to a regular school and then doing like JEE coaching in the evenings or something, but that just seemed very, very difficult. Like it's obviously it's very time consuming to do both separately. And for the most part, the state board curriculum was like a subset, I'd say, of the IIT JEE curriculum. So studying focusing on IIT seemed to be sufficient at the time. As for the like how the coaching itself went, I think obviously it was like a pretty intensive 2 years, right? So you're spending, day in day out, you're going to be preparing for JEE. It's quite a hectic schedule, and there's generally, I guess, a lot of pressure on you, as I'm sure that you would also know likely. But yeah, I think what ended up working well for me in general was having sort of like a consistent plan for like how I'd go about studying different subjects, and like when I'd be taking my tests, or like even having like timed tests for myself. So I think most importantly, having that sort of self-motivation was important, especially in sort of deciding like how are you going to plan things, how like when you're going to study what are you going to focus on, all that stuff. And on a related note, I think it's also important to note that so like you don't need to like know sort of what your strengths and weaknesses are and sort of where you draw the lines, I think like a good illustrating example that I went through, for example, was so we like the coaching center that I was a part of, we actually had different centers in Bangalore, like in different parts of Bangalore. So they had like one single unified test that they did for everyone in 12th standard in the beginning of 12th. And they took like the top like 30, 50 score or something like that. And then they took us to like a residential program somewhere else in Bangalore. And that's like a really intensive program where you're waking up at 6 a.m. doing these tests and then studying the whole day. And then you get like an hour break and then you go back to your like, to your hostel and then you study again, right? And so yeah, I was one of the top scorers. So I got selected for this program, and I was somewhat apprehensive about it because I hadn't really been like away from home for an extended period of time before. And it seemed very stressful, I guess. But yeah, basically I talked to my parents. We decided that I'd give it a shot. So we'd see how it goes. And I tried for a couple of weeks. I think the program was for a few months. I tried it for a couple of weeks, and then I decided I couldn't take it anymore. And I talked to my parents, and they were like very supportive about it. And they actually pulled me out despite like the director of the program being like against it and trying to convince them to get me to stay. So at the end of the day, I was like fairly guilty / ashamed, right? That like, why am I the only one who wasn't able to handle this program or whatever? But at the end of the day, I did end up getting a good rank. And I think if I had decided to stay on in the program, either my rank would have been worse or it would have been similar, but my mental health would have been worse. So I think it's like, just because like even by the end of 2 weeks, I was just burning out. And, everyone has different I think, techniques or like patterns that work best for them, where they're most productive. And that sort of intensive program just didn't work for me. And I was more productive going at my own pace at home. And obviously for some people, it might be the other way around. But I think the point I'm trying to make is just that it's very important to have like this sort of discussion early between like the parents and kids, or early meaning like for me, it was like in 10th standard, for example. And, you sort of need to know, obviously everyone wants the best for you, and you sort of need to make sure you're on the same page, communicate, make sure that, you communicate your like dreams or your likes, and your parents try to, temper that, or give you their expectations, so that everyone's on the same page and can sort of help to avoid stress or disappointment down the line. So I think it's important to be like openly communicative.
Yeah, that's pretty helpful. Hey, so the best thing for me actually, in all the stuff that you said is pressure is okay, right? You sort of normalize it, right? Like someone like you who's gone on to IIT Bombay and been a top scorer there and all of that. Very early on, you realize that there is a certain kind of pressure in that intensive learning program, and you spoke about it openly to your family, and great to hear that they were supportive, and they did not sort of force you to be in that, and that actually worked in your favor, right? You were still able to crack it up. Maybe you cracked a better rank than what you would have had you been a part of that pressured situation, right? So I think that's all's well that ends well. One more thing sort of that I noticed was you mentioned you started your prep seriously more around the 10th standard, right? And it's this sort of common talk in India that hey, in the South people start super early, like 6th grade or even earlier than that. What do you have to say about it? Did you ever feel that hey, I could have started a bit earlier, I should have started a bit earlier? What are your thoughts around that?
Right. Yeah. That's a great question. And I think these are also sorts of discussions that I did have at the time as well. But for the most part, no, different things work for different people, but I don't think it's really necessary to start in like 6th grade or whatever, to start preparing for IIT. Like I know that it starts getting earlier and earlier where you're like, no, I need to start putting as much time as possible. But at the end of the day, I think it's not necessary that the more time you spend, or like the more effort you, or like just like forcing yourself to study is necessarily going to get you a good rank. So that interest does have to be there. And if you're going to start out in 6th, but you're not interested in any way in the subject matter, right? You're not really going to gain too much out of it. So again, I think it comes back down to some degree of like communication. Obviously, when you're in 6th standard, you're not going to have a very strong opinion on these things, or like a very clear idea about the long-term picture, which is why that's where like the discussion between the parents and the kids comes into play. But for the most part, I think for me personally, it was the right time to start. Like I started the program in 11th, the beginning of 11th, and I think that was the right amount of time for me.
All right, awesome. Hey, so just a quick note, I've been noticing a few of the kids have been raising their hands on Zoom. Guys, so towards the end, we're going to be actually doing a 15-minute Q&A session. So please feel free to, pop in all of your questions in the chat window. Throughout this, I'm going to be, someone from our team is going to be reviewing the chat box, and, all the common questions, we're going to pull them out and, give you a chance to actually ask them out to Deepak here. So yeah, feel free to, ask all of your questions in the chat box.
Hey, Rishabh.
Yeah.
Hey, Rishabh, we have just deactivated the chat box for some time. There was a lot of disturbance in between. I think let people raise hand when we start the Q&A, and then you can unmute each one of them one by one.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, awesome. But keep those doubts in with you. Probably note them down somewhere or whatever, right? We will give you the chance towards the end to actually ask that out. So we're going to be doing that. Awesome. So this was, this is sort of your journey up till IIT, right? What after that? How was, what were your expectations going into IIT Bombay? Was it any different? And, what are, say, your top, top highlights of the IIT journey, right? If you look back now, what things really strike out for you? What do you think you spent most of your time on?
Right. Yeah. Interestingly, like even after I got the JEE, like a good rank in JEE, there was like one big decision that we had to make was sort of which IIT to go to. And being from Chennai, and like my parents were in Bangalore, but most of my extended family was in Chennai. So obviously IIT Madras would have been like, I guess for a lot of people, that would have been an easy decision. But for us, we sort of made the call that Well, I guess my parents decided that I needed to be like a little bit more outgoing, and maybe being away from an easy, comfortable family situation would be better for me that way. And obviously, at the beginning, I was a little bit apprehensive about that as well. Not as much as the like the intensive 12th standard program. That one was terrible. But for IIT, it was like difficult because I don't know Hindi, so there was the social aspect of it. Would I be able to make friends? And then again, the first extended period of time that I'm being away from home. And in many ways, like your undergrad experience is when you're really becoming an adult, right? You're becoming independent, and like for a lot of people, you're going to be moving away from home, or to a large extent, that's the point beyond which like you're like people can't really push you to do things anymore. It's like it has to be self-motivated, and it's up to you. And for me personally, I think that decision to go to Bombay instead of Madras worked out very well because, like, yeah, it was like a really great experience at IIT Bombay. I think the best thing about it is probably just the fact that there are so many like people who are smarter than you there. So it's just a great experience to learn a lot. And just being like day in, day out in the hostels with all these people, you make like, you of course end up making like lifelong friends, right? And I think college is like, again, that's the time where you're sort of trying to like discover yourself in some ways. And there are just so many opportunities, right? So like I tried to get into like writing, like literary stuff. I tried to get into journalism. Tried to play football. So that's the time where you really have like all the options open to you. So in that sense, I think it was like a really formative experience. And looking back on it now, it was definitely like four of the best years of my life. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. And yeah, just sort of, to like put out like a personal experience out here, right? I lived a year of my life in London, like sometime back right, in 2019. And the best part for me was, the day I went there, I was just looking, I didn't know anyone else. I was just looking online of, hey, do we have anyone, from our circle? And I literally found like, multiple WhatsApp groups with tens of, IIT Bombay, not even just IIT Bombay, right? Tens of IIT Bombay folks in that city. And if you just like, go to like Facebook or LinkedIn and put in the filter of, coming of this college and this location, you'll find so many people that you can reach out to. That's how I made my first set of friends, right? My peers and seniors. So I think that alumni network, that people keep talking about is true, right? Do you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's like a very tight knit community, and that definitely stays with you well after you've actually like graduated from IIT. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, so I mean, we just condensed your 4-year journey in less than 5 minutes, right? So there's a lot that we could actually talk about. Maybe in the future we'll do an episode just for how is life in an engineering college or in an IIT, right? So now just moving on from IIT. Okay, so you've done 4 years in IITB. You were in mechanical, right? Which is not I think which is not a very hardcore coding. It's not computer science. It's not electrical.
Right.
The coursework does not involve a lot of coding. And fast forward from there to what you're doing right now. I think the bridge you took was doing a master's in machine learning at Carnegie Mellon. So can you talk a bit about it? Why did you want to do that, and then why specifically Carnegie Mellon? Was did you always want to move abroad? How were you thinking about it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I think mechanical engineering was sort of like my first preference in my whatever the form that you fill out after JEE, right, was Bombay's computer science. But obviously you need to be in like the top 50 or whatever to get into Bombay CS. So it's pretty challenging. But yeah, like I said, we decided on Bombay, and I went to mechanical engineering. And I wasn't I think mechanical engineering, there were a lot of courses I took, which I found really interesting. But I think by the end of the first year, I knew mostly that I would be unlikely to go into a core mechanical engineering job. But I think this is like generally a fairly common sentiment, I guess, among people who are not in computer science and electrical of maybe I don't want to do core jobs. Like you were in metallurgical, right? And I assume like it must have been a similar sort of atmosphere in your department as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess very early on, just like going with the crowd, my instinct was to say, okay, maybe I'll go into like finance or consulting, right? Because that's sort of like a typical path that you end up going on if you have an IIT degree, but you're not interested in your core field. So I sort of left my options as open as possible. I try to explore things within college academically. So I did a CS minor while staying in mechanical engineering as my major. I did I did like a mechanical engineering, sort of like a race car simulation internship. I did an internship in a finance company. So through most of this, up to the end of my third year, I was still mostly in the mindset that I'm going to go into like a finance or a consulting job. And I don't know, like my finance internship, like a lot of people from IIT Bombay went there, and I think a lot of people did enjoy their experience, but it was a little bit disillusioning for me. I didn't particularly enjoy it, and that's like the point where I sort of started questioning whether, is this really what I want to do? Am I just like going with the crowd? Those kind of questions started coming into mind. And around the same time, I sort of started hearing about or like reading about machine learning as an opportunity. And I guess that the term was like floating around a little bit, but being in mechanical engineering, it's never something that I had really like thought about in detail. And around the same time I was doing like the finance internship, I did start looking into it in more detail. And I guess like since you've already done the talk last week, which covered like the basics, but at a high level for whoever doesn't know, machine learning is basically about like taking past data and making predictions on future data from it. And it's like a very broad definition, and because of the applications are also quite broad. Like it could be anything from taking patient vital signs and then trying to predict if they have some kind of disease, or based on past clicks that users have on like Google search results, right? You try to rank the Google, when you enter a new query, you try to rank the results. All of that involves machine learning. So it was just like, it seemed like a field that was really taking off. In terms of like the actual work involved, it was on the side of like mathematics and statistics and computer science, which are always things that I found more interesting. Like even within mechanical engineering, I tended to like gravitate towards those kinds of courses, which are like more like maths or stats heavy. And just like the job prospects seemed quite good. So all in all, it just seemed like something which fit well with things that I was good at and things I was interested in and things which are actually like sought after. So it was a pretty last minute decision, obviously, because I'm this is like in my fourth year. If you're going to apply to, and I'm not going to get like a machine learning job straight out of a mechanical engineering undergrad degree, right? And that's where like the bridging of the gap that you mentioned happens. So based on that, I decided to apply to grad school. And in general, there was like I think a general sentiment that for graduate degrees, the US tends to have like higher ranked universities and better like education systems. So mostly for that, and also the fact that I think for machine learning, at least at the time, the job market seemed to be better in the US. So because of that, I applied primarily to American universities, and I got into a few of them. It was like, I guess I did luck out to some extent because I had like some good letters of recommendation and good grades. So it ended up working out. So I had a few offers, and CMU was the top preference for me personally, because most of my other offers were basically masters in computer science. But I had decided I wasn't specifically interested in, I wasn't like broadly interested in computer science. I wanted to like do machine learning specifically. And Carnegie Mellon had like its own dedicated machine learning department, which most universities did not have, at least at the time. And so like getting into like the masters in machine learning program at that, like a dedicated masters in machine learning, that seemed like the easy option for me. So that's why I ended up deciding on CMU.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Carnegie Mellon University is actually like one of the top 5, 10, 3, whatever that number keeps changing, but that is the IITs of the West, right? So that's awesome. And you mentioned you very early on you realized you did not enjoy mechanical engineering, and it still surprises me to this day that how did you like end up topping the batch despite not liking a subject? So we can get to that offline, but yeah, I think I also heard race car simulation, right? You did something in race. What that sounds super fascinating. Do you mind just elaborating a bit on that? What exactly was that?
Yeah, for sure. So this was actually, I was lucky enough to get like a university internship at the end of my second year in London. So this was in Oxford Brookes University, which is, it's not Oxford. It's in the town of Oxford, but it's a separate university from Oxford. And I try not to make the distinction. It's fine, whatever you want to believe. But so there I was with a mechanical engineering professor, and she was like, you must remember that we had like IIT Bombay Racing, right? Which was like the like the race car team. So they had like an equivalent team that she was the head of, essentially, my professor there. And so she had an intern the past summer who had done like some work just like simulating under very basic conditions, like building a simulator for a race car in MATLAB. Basically like coding in like the differential equations and solving them and things like that. So I ended up following up on that work, and that was like a really great experience. Like I know that I said that I wasn't super interested of mechanical engineering generally, but I think those were one of the things, I think one of the projects I worked on, which I really did enjoy. And that did also like tie into my decision later to like go the machine learning route, because I think the aspects of the project that I ended up enjoying were like the mathematics and the coding, which is what it was like very heavy on like maths and coding because of like the simulation aspect of it. So yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay, so you did end up creating some sort of simulations which go into like creating an F1 sort of a car, a race car.
Not that fancy, but yes, in that general direction.
All right. Okay. Sounds cool. Okay. So, we've just, had like an intro of your why you went to the US and why Carnegie Mellon, right? Just sort of to touch upon a bit more, how are US universities different from in Indian ones, right? Like how was sort of your life in CMU or the other aspects that you see around, maybe the labs, the teachers, the peer group, etc., right? Like what were some of the key differences versus IIT, if you like tell that? Because I know there are, a few, a good number of people in our audience who are probably in their high school or sort of, closer to the 10th, etc. Right? So they might be thinking about their next steps as, to a US university. So I think it'll be interesting for them to
know. Right. Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So I do have to say one aspect which may sort of like imbalance my perspective is that I did like undergrad at an Indian university versus grad school at the American university. And I think like undergrad versus grad school are fundamentally very, very different experiences. So there is like that thing. So take things with a grain of salt. Generally, I think the key, like, I would say the most important factor of your undergrad life, right, is like your peer group there, because they're the ones who you're going to spend a lot of time with. And obviously the professors are important, the education is important, but to a large extent, you're going to be, the extent to which you learn is as much dependent on you as like the professors and the education system. While the peer group can have like an outsized impact on, like who you become as a person and what are the kinds of things you do and how much you learn. And in that sense, I think, again, like CMU, when I went to it, had a very like I had a really smart peer group. I like most of the people in my master's in machine learning program had like significantly more knowledge and expertise than me. So it was like a great learning. Obviously, it was a little bit intimidating, obviously being in that class as well, but it was also a really great experience learning wise. So that aspect of it, I think, is going to be the same. The one sort of key difference that I can think of is like just like diversities on the campuses tend to be very different. Because obviously in both in terms of like everyone at IIT is going to be Indian, and whereas everyone in the American university it's going to be more distributed, and also in terms of in our IIT class that it's probably like 90% men and like 10% women, right? So that there tends to be more of that sort of diversity as well in American universities from what I've seen. So I think in both these aspects, it is like when you're growing as a person, having a diverse peer group is really helpful to have like all these different perspectives and voices. And in that sense, like, I don't think you're going to be necessarily missing out on something if you end up deciding to go to an Indian university. Obviously, like IIT was a great experience, like I said, but I think that is one aspect where the American university does add value that that you won't be getting in an Indian university.
Awesome. Hey, cool. So just in the interest of time, again, I know, there could be a lot more that we could cover on this.
Sure.
Before we move on to the Q&A, I want to spend some time on, on probably one of the most exciting parts of this talk, Red, which is your life at Twitter. So quickly, I have like very direct questions here. How Twitter, like how did you end up? Because I know thousands of people, dream of, working at a company like that, Twitter, Facebook, these big names that have millions of users. So how did you sort of find your way to Twitter? And then my next follow-up to that would be, what is a day in the life of a Twitter engineer like, right? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? Yeah, I just want to know.
Right. So for me, I had, like, as soon as I joined CMU, my program at CMU was only a year and a half. So as soon as I joined, I started applying for internships, and I actually got the Twitter final offer after doing an internship there. So the internship itself, it tends to be like, I think this audience probably doesn't need to worry about interviews and stuff yet, but typically they tend to be like, your a few rounds of like technical interviews where they're going to focus on your coding, your algorithms, your problem solving. They'll ask a few questions on like your motivation for joining the company, those kinds of things. One thing that did help, like you said, like thousands of people are applying to these things, right? So for me, one thing that did help is I did have a referral to Twitter from like a senior from my program. And that was definitely helpful. Like, it doesn't guarantee you an interview, but it guarantees that they will at least like look at your resume. So that definitely helped. And then at the internship itself, I had a great experience, and I think my team liked having me there as well. So I got the full-time offer. Yes, and your second question regarding the day in the life of a Twitter engineer. So I think in machine learning in general, it's going to be like when you're working in a machine learning role at a big tech company, it's going to be a combination of, you're going to read about the latest research, see if there's some interesting new ideas that have been suggested, and then sort of see, can that be implemented in our use case somehow? And then you might build like a prototype which proves that this works well, and then you actually end up figuring out what's the right way to scale this to all the users that we have. So typically it's going to be like, depending on how many projects I'm working on, it's going to be a combination of all these things.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that's awesome. So I think, one of the things that I also wanted to ask was, hey, is there anything, any feature of Twitter that we see that you probably might have worked on, but yeah, you told me that your work is more in the ads team, right? So not really something which we could really relate with it. It's super hardcore in the back end. So let's
right. Yeah, I think like most machine learning roles, I think they tend to be, you like someone who's working on search at Google, for example, right? They're going to be improving the ranking of the results. So if you end up seeing like good search rankings, that might be related to something they do. And so similarly, I guess if you see a good ad on Twitter, that might be related to something I did. But yeah, like you said, it's mostly stuff in the back end, like more related to the algorithms we use. So it's not like a shiny new feature on the platform itself.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, cool. So I think it's time to move to the Q&A now. So what I've done actually right now is, when we launched that we're doing the CampK12 Talks second episode with you, we got about 250 odd questions that people wrote back to us, right, in the reg form. So I'm going to ask each and every, no, I'm not going to ask each and every one of them. I've picked out 3 most commonly asked questions from that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask them out to you, maybe 2, not 3. And then we'll just open it up. We'll take a couple of questions from the audience before we wrap up the show, right? The first, most common thing, I'm just going to paraphrase, one of the questions that we got, right? Which is, how do you plan the journey school to corporate? Is IIT mandatory for anyone to succeed from India to shine in Silicon Valley? Right. So yeah, how do you think about this? Was it a very conscious, choice of planning? Okay, hey, I need to do IIT, then I need to move to Silicon Valley, and then I need to work at a big company like Twitter. Yeah.
Yes, like definitely not. So like I mentioned before, I think your priorities can change very quickly, and absolutely, like, I think what's most important is to leave as many options open as possible while gradually getting more specific in what you want to do. So for example, right now, if you're in like 10th standard or something, right, you might want to make the broad decision of what are the sort of subjects I've been interested in. Do I want to go into engineering? Do I want to go into medical? Do I want to go into arts? Like depending on what you found most interesting. So you might want to make that decision for now. So similarly, when you enter undergrad, right, there again, you might want to like just explore as many career options as you have as possible. I think that's one thing which I think was not done very well in IIT, in that I don't think we had too much like career counseling, and we could have had more of it. And I think typically, even at the end of IIT, it's not necessary that everyone knows exactly what they want to do, right? Like I pretty much knew or thought I knew for 3 years, and then everything changed. And I think a lot of our batchmates, something similar happened, and I'm guessing something similar maybe for you as well. So everyone does like iterate and gradually move towards what they think works best for them. So I don't think there's no point, I think, at this stage making like 10-year plans or something, right? So what like I said, what does make more sense is to focus on what you think is the most important right now, and do that to the best of your ability. And coming back to the second question of like whether IIT is like required to shine in Silicon Valley or something, it absolutely, again, it isn't. I work with a lot of Indians on a day-to-day basis who didn't go to IITs. And similarly at CMU, I had a lot of batchmates, not necessarily in the ML program, but in like neighboring programs like CS and LEC, who were doing masters there, who also did not have an IIT degree. So I think maybe IIT, where it does help is, initially it can sort of open a few doors for you when you're deciding what your first job is, and maybe cascading that can like open up more doors and so on. But at the end of the day, what's going to, like, your career is going to depend on how well you do at the end of the day. And 20 years down the line, no one's really going to care if you have an IIT degree or not. So yeah,
Hey,
absolutely try.
Can I add on to what you're saying? Because I find this to be a very, very relevant question for the parents in the audience, and I want to share my perspective as well. So can I add on to what you just said?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Deepak. And by the way, really appreciate having you here with the CampK12 family. So thank you for joining us from a different time zone, that too. So guys, having grown up in the Valley and having been to various tech companies, I did work at Google, Microsoft, Apple, various tech startups throughout my MIT days. I think especially if you're asking the question for US companies and US colleges, then it matters less that you went to an IIT than if you were to ask the same question for an Indian tech company. I think Indian placement systems still are evolving to be more open-minded and to hire based on skills rather than degrees. I feel like that's a change that CampK12 hopes to bring to India, but in the US that change is much further along. So you'll notice there have been news headlines in the last couple of years where companies like IBM, like Google, maybe Twitter as part of them, have announced that they no longer even require a college degree to admit you, to interview you, to admit you to work in those companies. That's a big statement, right? It still means that, okay, the majority of people will have college degrees because of how recruitment works. You go to colleges and you get people there, but it means that the mindsets are shifting among these employers and companies. And the same thing with colleges. I can tell you that unlike our guest Deepak here, I was not the academic topper in my high school, and I was never first place in any exam. But the reason I got into colleges and into the computer science programs and all of that is because I had a portfolio of coding projects, which distinguished me from other people who were academic toppers. Because there are many people who really excel in exams, and that's kind of the defining that's something that defines them, that they're really smart, they're really good at exams. I feel like more and more US universities and companies would look at what you can do rather than where you went to college and how well you scored. For example, in the US, you have report cards in colleges, but no employer ever asked for a report card. Even in my interviews with Microsoft and Google, like I would spend my time talking to these people about what I built outside of class, right? And I think that mattered to them much more than it would to an Indian interviewer who might say, no, why are you telling me about your projects? I just want to ask you a algorithmic question. That might happen in India. In the US, you'll find that because these human beings on the other side are themselves doers and they have empathy for skills and building, they are very open to rewarding people who have excellence in building and in coding and in doing, rather than excellence in taking exams to prove that. So I feel like that question is a really good one. And especially the Western system rewards people with skills rather than people with degrees. I feel like if there's any system like that, the Western system is more so like that than the system we have in South Asia and East Asia today. I think that South Asia and East Asia, as you said yourself, Deepak, will evolve. And in 20 years, the IIT degree is not going to differentiate you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, just to add like my 2 cents on this, right? I'm nowhere as qualified as the two gentlemen who spoke before, but the only point I'd like to add here is, while having said all of this, there are a lot of benefits of going to these places like IITs, NITs, BITS, right? There is the alumni network, there is the type of education you have, there is the peer group that you have. There are a lot of benefits, but that will no way ensure that you're successful, and that is no way a prerequisite for success, right? I know like so many people who are doing like so much good stuff who don't come from any of these backgrounds, right? It's all about what have they done, throughout that really help them, right? So I think that's important to say. Just Deepak, one last question before I shut up and I let our audience speak. Is in all of this process, when did you like end up writing your first line of code? Right? Were you always a coder back from your school days, or is that something you picked up very late? How was it for you?
Right. I think for me it was because my high school did have some computer science, just like very basic computer science courses. And I think that was probably when I started picking it up. Maybe I would say like 7th standard-ish, maybe, where we had like a simple course where we had to code in C++. That being said, I think there is not necessarily like a right age that you need to start coding. Like there's no too early or too late. I think it's essentially it's a very vital skill these days, because even if you're not in machine learning or like a code like tech company or whatever, right? The coding is still very much going to be a part of your job, very likely. So it's pretty much any field that you go into, there's going to be like to some extent you will have to be interacting with computers, and to a large extent you will also likely be coding to some capacity. So I think that's like a very useful skill for the 21st century. And at any point, I think it's like a good option to explore, because it is very like intellectually also it's very interesting. It's like a unique type of problem solving.
Yeah, and you'll be surprised to know that we have so hundreds and thousands of kids in like second grade, third grade, fourth grade, right, building their own games, mobile apps, and all of that. I mean, at this age, I can't build out a mobile app, and then back then there was no chance. I probably didn't even know what a mobile app was back then, right? Like let alone making one. So I think that is super awesome. Yeah. So now let's just move on to the audience. I see a lot of them have have their hands raised. So just one word, one disclaimer, folks. Let's any questions you have regarding Camp K12, you can write into us. Deepak, for Deepak DDK, let's put in questions which general question, not Camp K12 specific questions, right? So of the people who've raised their hands, I'm just going to pick randomly. Mr. Jitendra Gopalan, if you're on, would you want to go first with your question?
Rishabh, you would need to unmute the gentleman.
Yeah. I have.
Hello?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Deepak. So, Deepak, one thing which I really found interesting among your speak was that around 2010, that's when you realized that machine learning is going to take up in a very big way in the due course of time. So, at this particular stage, what is that particular thing which, or what is that particular technology that you think is going to really take up in the next a decade or so? Like what machine learning or AI was possibly in the US around 2010. What is it that is right now picking up a lot of hype in the US? Or what is something that while my son is in 6th standard is also into coding, I'm sure through coding there'll be some technology that is actually going to pick up in the next decade. What is that technology which is really picking up the hype in US right now?
Right. Yeah, I think just as like coding in general starts plugging into different fields, there's a lot of opportunities that start opening up in each of these fields, right?
Yeah.
So I think coding is probably going to be like form the base of whatever it is. And so for any field from the last like 15, 20 years, you can now find a degree somewhere in the world, which is like a computational version of the field. Like if it's biology, you'll have like computational biology, that sort of thing. So I think a couple of maybe cool areas that I saw when I was in grad school, or that I continue to see now. Like I said, there's like sort of biology and genetics and those kind of things, and how you can go about, for example, curing diseases, for example, by understanding human genome better, those kinds of things. there's also a lot of interesting work being done in the field of neuroscience, because like we don't really have a very good understanding of the brain right now. And as that understanding deepens, it really opens up a lot of opportunities. Me personally, I've never really been much of a bio person, so I never ended up like going down either of these paths. But personally, I think they're like very interesting, and you're going to likely see a lot of cool stuff come out of it in the next 10 years.
Sure. Thanks, Atul. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Rishabh, for the next question, can we go to someone at the opposite end of the age spectrum? I saw this young child under the name Suman Biswas raising his hand very patiently. Suman, we would like to see you very clearly, so you might have to angle the camera down. I saw you raising your hand and would love to give you a chance to ask.
Yes. Ask.
Sir, how to make games in mobile?
How to make mobile games, you mean? Was that the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. Well, okay, so this is a good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer it because like Rishabh, I actually don't know how to make mobile games. But in general, I think what you can do is, I think there's a lot of resources available on the internet. You can see a lot of really interesting examples.
Camk12.com is a resource.
Yes, I think that's probably the best resource, honestly. So yeah, there's lots of examples that you can find of simple things that you can make very easily. So you can build interest from there.
Cool. Yeah, but genuinely, Suman, I don't know what grade are you in? What grade are you in?
Level 2.
You're in level 2, but which class in school?
Class 2.
Class 2.
Yes.
So, Suman, when you get to class 4, even with CamK12, you'll start making mobile games.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you're super advanced, we can try to see if we can get you started earlier, even in class
4.
Yeah.
One more thing add one to. At what age he complete his complete coder?
So that's a good question, and I think Deepak has touched on the answer a bit when he talked about coding as a new way of thinking and problem solving. So to answer your question for someone, there is no age where you complete. You can add on to this, Deepak, but you don't complete becoming a coder. Just like when you are learning any other skill, like imagine swimmers who compete in the Olympics, tennis players who play tennis. Do you ever finish being a tennis player? Do you ever finish being a swimmer? There's always a room to do better and to practice more and to sharpen new skills. My view, and I would love for Deepak to add on, is coding is more of a way of thinking, and it's a language, much like English and math. So the same way you don't stop learning math, you don't stop practicing math in your academics. You go to college, you learn new math. Coding is a journey like that. It's not a certification course where you do this many hours and you get a certificate and you're done. That's my view, and I think Deepak would love to hear your thought on, when does one finish becoming a coder?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you said. I think it's something that, especially since computers are like so new, right? Just like generally speaking, there's probably plenty of people on these calls, the parents for whom when they grew up, computers just weren't as common, right? So I think just because everything is so new, the field is just rapidly changing. So something that you learn now, maybe it's outdated and you have to learn something new in 5 years. So you just need to like keep learning new things and improving. So there's never an end, but it is like, it does change your way of thinking.
Sure. Thank you, Deepak.
No problem.
Great. So next up is Dia Shodhan. Dia, I am going to unmute you. Just give me a second. Yeah, awesome.
So what is the most relevant coding language for children my age?
What is your age, to clarify?
How old are you? You're on mute.
Oh, okay.
11 years old.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, like I mentioned, I did start with C++, but I wouldn't recommend C++ necessarily. I think probably the best option is Python. Python is a very intuitive coding language to pick up on. And at the same time, it's also used by people who are actually working in, like I use it almost every day in my job as well. So it's something that bridges the gap of something that you can pick up early on, but something that's also used in practice every day. So I would recommend Python.
Anshul, do you want to add a few more to that?
Yeah, I do have a viewpoint on it. I would say that at your age, it doesn't matter what language that you learn. Python is a very relevant language. And so when Deepak tells you that Twitter machine learning engineers use Python, he's absolutely right. Last month, we heard from Nikhila, who is an AI engineer at Facebook. She uses Python too. In the field of AI and machine learning, Python is a dominant language. It's also easy to learn, as he said. But my view on this is it really doesn't matter, because much like we were discussing with the previous person who asked a question, what you're trying to learn at this age is the approach to problem solving, the approach to thinking about logic and how to put logic together, to think mathematically, to think logically, to express yourself creatively with code. And you can learn that with any language. Would you agree with that, Deepak? That the same logic you can express in Python, you can express in JavaScript, you can express in Java, you can express in C++, in any language.
Right, for sure.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
And because that's the case, I would say at this age, when you are a precious 11 years old, your goal should be to learn whatever language is needed to build what you are passionate about building and excited about building. So if it's a mobile app, for example, you cannot today build a mobile app using Python. And if you want to build a mobile app, you will either do it using the blocks-based programming tools we use in the early years in your 11-year-old age group, or you'll do it using Java, which is different from Python. If you are interested in building a website for your family, for your friends, for yourself, for a company you want to start, you would use JavaScript. You would use HTML, CSS. So I would say at this age, you and all the other parents and all the other kids here should not worry about which language am I learning. They should worry about, or think about rather, am I becoming fluent in this new language of the 21st century called coding? And what language I use to do coding at this age doesn't matter. Because if you become a good coder, you will learn Python in 1 week. If you become a good coder, you will learn Java in 1 week. If you become a good coder, whatever new language comes up 10 years from now, you will learn that in 1 week. For example, Deepak learned Python very quickly and applied it to being a machine learning engineer at Twitter. It's not like he's been doing Python since he was a kid, right? So there isn't, I think at this point, no parent or kid should fixate on the language. What they should understand is the logic is the same, whether it's expressed in one language or the other. For example, I'm talking to you right now in English, but we could talk in Hindi and we could say the same thing. It's exactly the same in the world of coding.
Great. Hey, so before we move ahead, Lavi, how many more questions can we take up? What's the time limit?
Okay, let's take up 2 more questions, Rishabh.
Okay, awesome. I see Pranav Sugali has been raising his hand for quite some time now. I'm just going to unmute you, Pranav.
Sir, I have a question that in Twitter, what type of chat means, what type of coding is being done?
So at Twitter, we have a lot of different teams which are doing different parts of the system, basically. For example, there'll be someone who's going to be building the twitter.com website. And the type of coding that they're going to be doing will be different from the type of coding that I'm doing, because like what I'm doing is more on the backend side. So you won't directly see what I'm doing on the website, but it may affect something in the background. So the kind of work that's being done by different teams at Twitter, it's very, very wide. And depending on what your interest in is within the world of coding, you can definitely work on different things.
This is a great follow-on to the question that Dia also asked.
Right.
The website twitter.com is going to be built in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's how all websites are built. There isn't a way for a browser to interpret any other language. You can't have a website on the front end, the actual interface being built in Python. It's going to be built in JavaScript as a core language, because browsers like Chrome and Internet Explorer and Firefox and whatever browser you use, they speak the language of JavaScript. So the website is built in JavaScript. That's exactly the point we were making earlier, that different things have different languages. Deepak works on a backend system to probably make sure that people see the right ads and that system is built. It could have been built in any language because there's more flexibility there, but it's written in Python, presumably, based on what Deepak has just told us. And I'm sure there are other teams that use other languages within the same company. And the same is true at Microsoft. The same is true at Google. And it's important, again, you recognize that you and your success as a coder in this world is not going to happen because you become an expert at one language. It's going to happen because you become an expert at the problem solving. And you can be fluent in any language. That's how you are, I think, going to succeed. And sure, if you decide you want to go into AI and machine learning, then Python will probably be more relevant for you. But who knows, maybe 5 to 10 years down the road, we're talking about a new language that has emerged. But it won't matter, because whatever language you learn today, you will be ready for that. Because I assure you, the languages of the future will have a similar grammar, similar vocabulary, similar high-level logical structures.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Awesome. I have about I think 20 plus people waiting to ask questions, but we unfortunately just have one last question. What we're going to do next time as learning from this, so that everyone is able to ask questions. But for now, what we can do is we can just take up one last question, after which we'll email you guys a form and you can fill in your questions, and yeah, I can request Deepak to sort of try and answer those questions if that's okay. For now, let's pick up Divya and Diti. I see your hand raised for some time. I've just unmuted.
Yeah, so my question is that I want to become like you, a successful person, and I'm 12 years old. So how should I plan my career from now only?
That's a great question. And I think this also is related to something that we discussed earlier, that like you said, at 12 years old, I had no idea that I'm going to do machine learning or something at 12 years old, right? So I think the best thing to do now is focus on the subjects that you currently have and try to understand what you enjoy. Like maybe some people may enjoy like physics more, some people may enjoy math more, some people may enjoy biology or history, right? So try to understand among the subjects that you currently have what you enjoy more, and based on that you can decide what to focus on and sort of what to do when you decide to go to college. But I don't think you need to worry too much about like 10 or 15 years down the line what job or what career you're going to have. For now, just try to understand what you enjoy the most. Yeah.
All
if
right,
Rishabh or Anshul have anything to add, feel free to. But
yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said. Let's not think 10 or 15 years down the line. So I think, the keyword, how do I be successful, that differs for everyone, right? You might, someone might feel what Deepak is doing, working at like that bigger tech firm, that is being successful. Someone might think someone who's an artist who's working for themselves, and, that might be, success. So success really depends. You will figure that out, along the way. But yeah, what essentially Deepak meant is, explore a wide variety of things that you like. He's spoken about a lot of subjects. I'll add coding to it. Explore a lot of different courses that you want with CampK12 or outside of CampK12. You will figure out where your heart lies more. Build some apps, build some websites, build some AI chatbots. Right? You will figure out what you like, and as you go along, as you build projects, your sort of way will get clearer for you. That's what I had to say. But yeah, I think we've overshot by some time already. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for all the 200 odd guests who've been a part of this and who've stood along with us for over an hour. And a special round of applause to Deepak. Deepak, thanks a lot for agreeing. This is like literally, we're eating away your time at night. Probably you'll get like an hour of sleep lesser than what you do tomorrow. But thanks for that. I think everyone really enjoyed the sessions, and after the session, any questions that they have, I'm going to pass them on to you. And yeah, whenever you get some time, right? Not necessarily in one day, but yeah, you could revert back. I'm going to send those messages across back to these folks. Let's do that.
There's one more idea, which is we should definitely solicit these questions. We should ask for people who raise their hand to send their questions. We can even continue with these questions in the next session. I'm sure some of them are actually generic to coding or companies and the big tech companies. And our next month's guest who will be from Microsoft, has also worked with Amazon and also worked with Oracle and multiple tech companies, also an IIT computer science grad. So we will have another chance for you guys to get these questions answered. So we look forward to seeing these young, bright, passionate faces again in the next month. Really appreciate Deepak's time. I think, Deepak, you can tell you have really inspired this crowd, and we would love to have you back for a second go. We can always do another one of these because this has been such a popular event. So thank you again, and see you guys all for the next month's webinar.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
It's great talking to you.
Thank you so much, Deepak.
Bye.
It was wonderful having you around. Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.